Good afternoon, everyone. Loremaster Sotek here, back with the second episode of the Heroes of Legend series. I am very pleased to see that it looks like pretty much everyone enjoyed the first episode that we did on Bretonnia. I am happy to say that one was definitely the episode I think I had to stretch the material I was working with the most, just because, of course, Bretonnia is the oldest of the Warhammer Fantasy books by the time the setting ended. So it did have a number of characters to work with if you go all the way back to 5th edition and 4th edition, but of course those characters do require a significant amount of cleaning up and adjusting to be appropriate for the modern version of Warhammer Fantasy. I do hope you all really liked it, but it is time for us to turn from the shining beauty of Bretonnia's noble heart and descend into the foul darkness that lurks in the shadow of lands untamed by civilization. The Beastmen are the true children of chaos, and they have produced no shortage of freakish horrors over the years to bring ruin and death to the cities of men. For the two candidates I'll be looking at, those potential creatures who would require some real effort to bring forth in the Dark God's name. The first Beastman worthy of this DLC slot is Moloch Slugtongue, the Famine Fiend. For those unfamiliar, Slugtongue is one of the most unique characters in the bloated roster of Chaos, as he is the embodiment of winter's cruel touch and famine. The Lord of the Black Harvest makes for a disturbing figure as he shambles across the old world, as from a distance he appears to be little more than a set of ragged robes covering an emaciated body bearing a terrifying skull for a head with ratty white hair. Upon closer inspection, it's actually much worse, as despite Slugtongue's withered form, he is teeming with parasitic life. His liver-spotted and ancient flesh spots countless bloated ticks, bouncing fleas, and freakish lice, while immense cockroaches roam every crevice on his hideous frame. Worst of all are the massive venomous centipedes that crawl from his empty eye sockets, and slimy slugs spilling from the gaps in the Barren One's teeth as he croaks out spells of inevitable doom. The passing of Moloch through any region is a death sentence for those who stay, as the horrible desperation and cruelty of famine follows in his wake. His greatest power lies in his ability to unleash unfathomable blights upon the civilized nations through disturbing displays of might. With a single gesture, he can unleash swarms of skull-headed locusts to devour fields, corrupt vibrant streams into corrosive bile, or degrade carefully guarded grain and stored ale into rotten gunk. Most troubling, however, is that unlike many of the incredibly powerful Beastmen, Slugtongue is incredibly intelligent, and without a hint of the madness that possesses the likes of Morgur or Taurix the Brass Bull. He causes these deranged acts because Moloch knows that when people get hungry, they're not only weakened, but become quite prone to making rash decisions. Those on the verge of starvation may well turn upon their fellows or commit vile atrocities in order to survive, until they at last discover the presence of the Famine Fiend and charge out to slay him. But this is all merely a part of the plan, as those starving fools who strike out to heroically vanquish Slugtongue find his vast bray herds eager for battle, on full stomachs and in top shape. The ensuing massacre overshadowed by the haunting laughter of the Barren One. That completes the lore section for Slugtongue, but I do want to make a quick note that I think a lot of people will enjoy this guy due to, I've noticed in the Ogre Kingdoms Q&A, we've talked about the Gorgons and the Morghuls lately, and a lot of people seem to like Wendigo lore, and Slugtongue is the true inheritor of being the embodiment of famine that those original tales were meant to invoke and inspire. Anyway, let's jump straight into suggestions on how someone would best acquire Moloch Slugtongue in campaign. I imagine the most thematic way to acquire him would be simply to successfully raise a human major settlement. So a provincial capital of the Southern Realms, Bretonia, or the Empire. If it were to be something a tad more difficult or involved, perhaps it could just be a quest battle where your lord has to perform a ritual that culminates in summoning the famine fiend to serve your faction. So it'd be like a little story mission where maybe you're being attacked by people who are trying to find him, and your goal is just to kill everyone long enough to lure Moloch out so he'll join you. Once unlocked, Moloch Slugtongue would be a devastating campaign juggernaut who would provide the Beastmen with the ability to inflict famines on enemy settlements and armies. This should essentially be the Skaven or Norska plague system, reworked to functioning around a single character. In battle, he'd revolve more around being just a nasty wizard, thanks to his lore selection of the Lore of Death and the Lore of the Wild. I think giving him a mixed lore of the two would be best. So maybe giving him like Viletide, Devolve, Soulblight, Traitorkin, Fate of Buna, and Purple Sun seems like a good mix that's not too overpowered. This, in addition to his personal abilities, poisoned melee attacks, and having regeneration, would make him quite a terrifying and formidable opponent if left alone to maximize his damage output. For his personal abilities, we're going to just come charging out of the gate into his claim to fame, the Curse of the Famine Fiend. I want to note that in tabletop, this ability was bullshit. It was really strong, and there was super scary, and there was nothing you could do about it. But once he got it off, that was pretty much the only thing he did. To translate it to the kind of live setting of Total War Warhammer, I would suggest making it a 1 use per battle active that grants Slugtongue the ability to inflict an exceptionally large AoE damage ability on his enemies. I would either say make it a minimum of 70 meters wide, and once activated, it simply deals a massive amount of drain damage, but with a decent chance of being resisted. So essentially, it would just be a large AoE Spirit Leech on all enemies in range, and reward the player for waiting to get Slugtongue in the perfect position before firing it off. Which, just for reference, 70 meters is of course massive and sounds massive, but in like a multiplayer scenario, it's not insane. It's pretty easy to dodge, as long as you're careful, or at least sniping him out before he gets the chance to use it. Perhaps in campaign, it could have some late game upgrade or late campaign upgrade in the skill tree that would enable Curse of the Famine Fiend to be map wide, or be used more than just once per battle. Something not originally on Moloch's skill set, but heavily talked about in his personal lore, is that he, in addition to famine, is a living manifestation of winter's cruelty, in that he's constantly surrounded by an aura of such extreme chill that all of the disgusting liquid that secretes from his body instantly freezes into these kind of nasty icicles, and just being near him is painfully draining. This should be interpreted as just a passive aura of chill that I think would just lower the speed of all enemies within range. I think there are certain creatures that have something like that. I think the Frost Dragons do on Norska's roster. Beyond that, Slugtongue is a pretty straightforward character in that he would have a very similar stat line to that of a basic Bray Shaman, except that he comes packaged with poisoned attacks and regeneration. So, I realize this probably sounds insanely overpowered, especially if you're more of a multiplayer person, but allow me to defend Slugtongue now by going into his weaknesses. The biggest problem with Slugtongue is that he is comically useless if forced to defend himself from any substantial threat. While he does possess poisoned attacks to debuff enemies in melee, and has regeneration to keep himself alive, the Famine Fiend has literally no armor to speak of, and his overall health pool and combat stats are just pitiful. Furthermore, unlike Morgur, who is very similarly set up but has very awesome stats and of course the ability to summon Chaos Spawn, Slugtongue has no resistances, outside of the bare minimum all characters come with. So if he's focused by any magic, shooting, or sustained combat, he'll bite the bullet pretty damn quick, and will need to be pulled back into safety so he can regenerate for a bit. But he doesn't have amazing leadership, he's not unbreakable, he doesn't have the ability to turn units into other units, he is just as vulnerable to magic as he is to combat and shooting. So he's very, very squishy. Other than if you try and take him down too slowly, he will be able to regenerate at least to survive. And he's not substantially fast either. You know, he's basically just a Bray Shaman with a little bit extra. And that, of course, that Curse of the Famine Fiend is nasty. On the campaign map, Slugtongue would really shine as a superpower to augment the Beastmen substantially, which they kind of need right now. I would grant him a unique agent action where he has the ability to infect settlements and armies with famine, which would cause them to suffer serious attrition damage in addition to nuking the income and growth of affected regions. This may need to be locked in his skill tree until he's roughly ranked 10 or so, like Lord Croak does with his City Wrecker ability. That way he's not just curb stomping the instant he arrives on the campaign. You know, you gotta level him up a bit. Most of his blue tree, or his blue skills in his skill tree, would focus on granting large growth and casualty replenishment bonuses to the army he joins, as he twists the power of famine and winter in the favor of the Beastmen. I could also see him granting further bonuses to ambush success chance, as he specializes in luring out enemy forces desperate to find the Famine Fiend. Finally, as late campaign upgrades, so maybe when he's around level 20, 25, 30, he could unlock the ability to drastically reduce enemy siege defense turns as he, unleashes famine upon them, and grant his famines the ability to be spread or simply used more frequently. Would be a pretty terrifying character in that sense. And man, it would be so nice for Beastmen. When it comes to the appearance section, I would simply suggest a faithful adaptation of his only piece of artwork published by Games Workshop. Thankfully, his portrait is very up close and detailed, and all of his iconic features are caught well despite the fact that it's in black and white. That brings us to the end of the Famine Fiend's entry. So time to turn our gaze upwards and to the sky to discuss the one true alien in all of Warhammer Fantasy. None other than Moonclaw, the son of Morsalib. Now, the nice thing about discussing Moonclaw is that I've actually done a special character video on him a few Halloweens back. So if you want all the dirty details on this freakish abomination, feel free to pop over there and check him out. Granted, it's an older video, so forgive me if it's a little cringy or whatever. I haven't watched it in ages, because I don't like to watch myself talk, just like most creators. Moonclaw is actually a horrific abomination that somehow was birthed by the Chaos Moon Morsalib. Although how long ago it happened isn't directly recorded, what we do know for sure is that on one particular Gehemmichnacht, when Morsalib was at its most bloated ever, outside of the end times, a single chunk broke off the moon and hurtled to the earth as a green, flaming meteor, eventually impacting a sacred grove in the barren hills and decimating the land for miles around, just incinerating and warping everything touched. The only living thing to emerge from that ruination was Moonclaw himself, having crawled out of a strange warpstone egg thing and covered with unspeakable fluids. Since that time, the lunatic prince, as he's known, has wandered around the old world as a bizarre freak, constantly glowing with green-black flames, denoting his twisted lineage. On nights where Morsalib is closest to the earth, he swells with enough power to summon his horrific mount Umbraloch, a twisted creature a tad larger than a warhorse, and possessing 2 heads. While not technically a beastman, funny enough, the Children of Chaos recognize Moonclaw's divine origin and gather to follow the lunatic prince as he continues his crusade to destroy all of the ancient waystones scattered around the old world, so that the forces of chaos might grow ever stronger. That concludes the lore portion for Moonclaw, so let us discuss how he could potentially be acquired in a Beastmen campaign. I think the most obvious answer would simply be that once the player successfully selects any option during a Chaos Moon event, which you could potentially restrict it to a full moon event if you wanted to make it a little harder, the Child of the Gravid Orb, as he's known, would become available to recruit. Alternatively, it could be a little quest line that revolves around destroying or corrupting a waystone to capture his attention. For his personal abilities, Moonclaw actually has a pretty nifty set of skills outside of just being a combat wizard that uses the lore of Shadow, which would be nice for Beastmen having a legendary Lord Shadowcaster. First off is his very peculiar ability known as Wave of Insanity, which traditionally is designed to make it where the lunatic prince infects all friends and foes too close to him with his deranged madness. I think a clever and interesting way to implement this in Total War would be to grant Moonclaw a passive aura that causes all friends and enemies to suffer from rampage. Granted, this would not affect Moonclaw himself, just the people close by him. This would be a really interesting ability to mess around with, as it would allow Moonclaw to completely disrupt formations around him and make his positioning incredibly important. If it needed to be buffed a tad, it could give friendly troops maybe the good version of Rampage that like the Lizardmen have, where they rampage but they get a stat buff while they're rampaging, and only give enemies the regular Rampage, where, you know, for both of them, once their health gets low enough, they rampage, but the Beastmen would maybe get a little stat buff. Perhaps it could be made into an active ability instead of just a perma-passive, that way it's not quite so wild, but personally I think the passive version would make it a little more fair and predictable, so Moonclaw wouldn't be as nasty. The next ability to look at would be Ward of Morslib, which should start as an active ability that grants Moonclaw a substantial ward save or physical resistance for a time to grant him some sort of defensive ability in case he gets focused. So it'd just be like a temporary buff you could activate that would protect him. Finally, my absolute favorite skill possessed by Moonclaw is called Unholy Zenith. This should be an active with probably 2 uses per battle that allows the Lunatic Prince to gain a massive boost to his Winds of Magic recharge rate, and allows him to cast a barrage of Warpstone meteors to strike a selected location. Imagine it like the Assault of Stone War Scroll perhaps, or similar spells where it causes like a big bombardment of big boulders and does tons of damage. This would allow him to just obliterate heavily armored infantry, cavalry, and monstrous infantry, or cav. I particularly like this idea because it would combo so well with his Wave of Insanity passive, allowing the player to trap enemy troops fighting low-tier Beastmen and then just kill everybody with a big ol' meteor, or set of meteors. I do think, though, that the Unholy Zenith ability should have some downsides, like it should have a very high miscast chance, similar to Ikit Claw's Unlimited Power ability. That way he hurts himself, or is very likely to hurt himself whenever he uses it. The best thing for late campaign in his skill tree would simply be allowing him higher tier skills that give him a greater passive ward save for his Ward of Morslib, basically allow him to upgrade it or just make it permanent, and allow him to cast Unholy Zenith more often, or maybe reduce the miscast rate. Granted, those would be campaign-only things. Perhaps in campaign, as like a very late upgrade, he could upgrade Wave of Insanity so it only affects enemies instead of everybody within range and stuff like that. And then, of course, he would have his mount, Umberloch, who, once again, Umberloch is kind of just a horse, just a really crazy-looking horse. He's got 2 heads, and he's not horrible in combat, but it's not like a really powerful mount, and it's not monstrous-sized or anything. On to the weakness section. The biggest flaws of Moonclaw revolve around his general lack of great combat skills and overall poor stats. Due to his bizarre vision, seeing more of the Winds of Magic than the true physical plane, very similar to a Cygor, both Moonclaw and Umberloch are not terribly skilled warriors, and they should probably have exceptionally low melee attack and melee defense for a independent legendary hero. In addition, they have virtually no armor piercing available whatsoever, and would be relying almost purely on a not great regular weapon strength. You may think Umberlock should be like super duper powerful, but once again, the big thing that he gives Moonclaw on tabletop is speed. That's his like big deal. You go from having a infantry character who can run as fast as regular Beastmen, which isn't crazy fast, but it's okay, you know, like a Gore. Or you could upgrade him to being almost basically as fast as Chaos Warhounds, which is much better. And would be nice to have a character that's swift for the Beastmen. You know, most of them you either go chariot speed or infantry speed. He'd be kind of a nice, even faster character running around. So with that, he would be fast enough to keep up with stuff like Centigores, though he'd probably drag behind them a little bit. But I don't know, maybe he'd be just as fast, depending on how they decided to interpret it. But it's a really important thing for him because it does allow him to reposition and get away from really bad engagements. Beyond that, Moonclaw should probably be... No, he should be built in with really, really serious magic resistance. That's one of his key features on his character design, is that being from the Chaos Moon, which is of course like a big magic thing, he has a ridiculous amount of magic resistance. Only other thing I would note in the weakness section is that he has almost no armor, and while the Ward of Morsalib ability is on cooldown, he should probably be pretty vulnerable to significant damage from shooting or close combat. On the campaign map, Moonclaw would bring the grand powers of the Chaos Moon full to bear in the Beastman's favor. I would love to see him provide a large increase to the Winds of Magic pool to any army he joins, or maybe just faction-wide, in addition to drastically lowering recruitment costs, as Beastmen flock from all around to serve the Moonchild. Maybe even lowering the recruitment timers on certain units like Cygors and stuff like that. He could also grant population growth to all Brayherds faction-wide, utilizing the power of Morsalib, and heavily increase chaos corruption anywhere he is present. I could also see him having a substantial reduction to enemy public order. I'm talking really big, like -10 or something like that, to represent his incredible aura of madness, driving everyone around him insane, everyone in the area insane. The big ability I would really want to see for Moonclaw, though, in campaign would be allowing him at low levels to reduce the time between moon events, and during late campaign gain access to a skill that makes it so every single time a moon event triggers, it's always a full moon, which gives you like the best results. So he would guarantee that you're getting the most powerful result every single time once he unlocks that skill. Granted, I will say that compared to the Slug Tongue idea, Moonclaw would probably need to wait until the Beastmen received a much more substantial rework. Slug Tongue, at least the way I imagined him and pitched him in here, I really feel like you could just drop in right now and he would immediately make a Beastmen campaign more fun. Moonclaw, while making the moon events, would be a lot cooler and allow you some better control over them. I don't know if he would alone be able to make the campaign more interesting and make the player feel more powerful, as well as the Slug Tongue idea could be. So he might need a little more help, or need to wait until after a hopeful Beastmen rework. When it comes to the appearance section, Moonclaw is honestly a character that Creative Assembly could afford to go a bit wild with. Like Slug Tongue, he only has one official piece of artwork, and while it is beautifully drawn, it makes it really difficult to make out much detail. You can't really see him all that well because it's at such a long distance. The only thing that I would say for certain that he would need to have on a designed model would be, for Total War, would be that he should be vaguely surrounded by a Warp Flame aura, which Warp Flame is traditionally like green and black. He's also supposed to be the most demented looking of the Beastmen characters. Like, he's supposed to be crazy looking due to the fact that he's like a creature born of the Chaos Moon and not a true Beastman. You know, he's kind of like the ultimate freakish abomination. Finally, that his Steed Umberlock, which of course Creative Assembly could also go wild with. The only thing noted about it is that it has 2 heads. Outside of that, they could really do whatever they wanted. So I would really encourage, if he was ever attempted, for Creative Assembly to just stretch their creative muscles with this guy and go nuts. It would be super fun. Alright, so that will be the end of the Beastmen episode for the Heroes of Legend DLC proposal. I would love to hear your thoughts on which of these 2 horrid creatures you would prefer to see as a playable Hero of Legend if given the chance, and why would you pick the person that you do. I will make a brief side note, because I know some people are going to be asking. The reason I did not select Ungrul Forehorn or Gorus Warhoof, for example, is that I honestly see them performing better as Legendary Lords or as free LC characters. As the thing about Ungrul Forehorn and Goros is that their models should be really simple. You know, Goros is just a Centaur plus, and Ungrul is literally just... he kind of looks like an Ungor that has like 2 heads stacked on top of each other instead of just 1 head. So I don't think they'd be that hard to make. Like hell, you could get away with making them using existing assets probably, but even if they've required completely new models, they would be fairly easy. Whereas Slug Tongue and Moonclaw would be like work. Like that, you need to pay for that. The other 2 I could totally see being either full-on Legendary Lords, because they work better in that capacity, or as free LC. So anyway, thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you have a wonderful day. And I'll see you tomorrow morning for some more Ogre Kingdoms goodness at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. Till then, guys.